today. My name is Gary Kibel, and the reason for the delay, I think some of you know there's a new feature to text in Q&A for each session. You're supposed to text the special keyword for each session, a space, then 22333 is the short code. But if anyone knows what the special keyword for this session is, please let us know, because none of us know what it is. Anyway, if somebody comes in, hopefully they will let us know. So until then, maybe keep your questions in your head. We'll ask Q&A the old-fashioned way. Okay, the name of this session is Master of Your Domain. This session is all about domain names. Our business, our industry relies upon domain names. To my left is Peter Marinello, who's from the National Advertising Review Council and Council of Better Business Bureaus. And to his left is Sara, who is from one of the largest domain name registrars, Melbourne IT. So you've got a good, excellent panel here to go through this issue. I'm an attorney, and I deal with advertising and marketing issues, because you might be wondering, why is a lawyer here at Affiliate Summit? I've actually been coming to Affiliate Summit for many, many years. We'll take a break for a second and see if we have the magic for texting, because we've been hunting Sean down, but he's quite popular today.
He's on his way in a minute, but he said just don't go through the moderation. Each page has a unique identifier, and people can text 22333 with that unique identifier. It'll say like AC10 4D or whatever the session is. Oh, okay. And so
we'll be able to find the questions later.
Yeah.
Or?
No, I think they'll show up.
They'll show up magically somehow.
But Sean will check on you.
Okay. All right.
On his way down.
Okay, so you will just text 22333 with your question, and they are going to magically appear. That's technology. Anyway, so again, I'm an attorney and deal a lot with these issues. When people have an argument or a dispute over a domain name, somebody's done something wrong to you on the internet, somebody criticized you on a blog, what's the first thing you do? Call your lawyer and complain, because nobody's allowed to do that to you in America. So I deal with a lot of interesting issues in this space, and one of them is domain names. So where do you get a right to a domain name? You know you can go register it, but legally, where is your right to a domain name? And ownership and rights in domain names come out of trademark law, something that's been around for a very, very long time. It's being applied to a new technology. A URL often consists of a trademark, so www.att.com. It contains part of the trademark AT&T or Nike.com. It includes the trademark. So that's where the right to a domain name comes from. All right, now you're all going to get your Law School 101. So what is a trademark? A trademark is what you think. It's a name, a word, a symbol, something that identifies your product or service. So if your company is bestaffiliatesintheworld.com, so your trademark that you're using is Best Affiliates in the World. Now, there are some restrictions on what you can own and what you can't own, but it's all about what trademarks do you have in a domain. So I'll give you some very basics here, and this is the one thing that will make you an expert next time you get to a cocktail party and someone asks you this question. How do you get rights in a trademark? Well, you register it or you use it. You actually don't have to register your trademark with the Patent and Trademark Office in Washington, D.C. Once you start using a trademark out in commerce, it starts to attach a meaning to your company, then you start to acquire rights. So the biggest question from people who are not lawyers is, what does that R in a circle mean, and what does the TM mean? I really don't understand. It's actually a very simple distinction. R in a circle means you have a registered trademark. You've gone through a registration process, and you've gotten a federal registration. A TM, you can attach a TM to anything. You don't need a registration. What a TM means is, I claim rights to this trademark. You're just telling the world. So you come up with the greatest trademark slogan while you're sitting here today, and you put it up on your website, you can attach a TM to it right away. You're telling the world, this is my trademark, and I'm going to defend it if there's any issues. So what type of issues come up? The most common thing is infringement. Now, what does infringement mean? Trademarks are very different than a copyright. Say that you took a photograph and put it on your website. You have a copyright in that photograph. Nobody can take that photograph and use it someplace else with limited exceptions, which are called fair use, but that's a totally different session. But basically, you own the rights in that photograph, and no one else can copy it without your permission. A trademark's very different. You can use someone else's trademark without permission. The issue is, are you going to create confusion? So if on your website you have links to sell Nike shoes, maybe you're an affiliate, you can use the trademark Nike, as long as you don't create confusion that you're somehow sponsored by Nike or that you're endorsed by them or associated with them in some way. So you are allowed to use it. Now, in the domain name world, that could be very challenging because if I registered a domain name, NikeShoes.com, I'm using their trademark. I just told you a minute ago you don't have to get permission, but that's a little confusing. If a regular person saw a domain name, NikeShoes.com, they might think, I think this domain is owned by Nike. So that's where the dispute comes in because you have a limited real estate there in the URL in which to explain that you may not be the owner of the trademark. You may be somebody else who's an affiliate of that trademark owner. So I said how the rights come in a domain name through registration. Depends on whether it's a GTLD or a country code top-level domain. The generic top-level domains like .com, .net, .org, many others. The country codes, .uk for UK, .fr for France, .de for Germany. Those are the country codes. And they have different processes for registering, and some of them have restrictions. A .com, you can be anybody under the sun and come and register a .com. For many country codes, you might have to have a presence in that country in order to register it. So then what happens if there's a dispute? Well, for those of us in the United States, there's two things we can do. If you've got a dispute with someone else who has a URL and you say, that's mine, they're using my trademark, I didn't give them permission, I want that URL back, there's two things you can do. There actually is a law in the United States called the Anti-Cyber-Squatting Consumer Protection Act, and you can go to court, like any other lawsuit, and sue them to get the domain name back. But there's a much simpler method, which is unique for the internet, and that is a domain name dispute. The ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is the organization that administers the domain names. And there's a policy under ICANN called the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy. In a nutshell, this is a little mini online arbitration, a little mini lawsuit that's conducted completely online. So if you've got somebody in California or in Hong Kong who is using your trademark in a domain name in an inappropriate manner, you can take action. Whereas if you had some other dispute with that person in Hong Kong, you might be saying, well, I'm not going to fly to Hong Kong and sue them. I just don't have the money for that. If you have a domain name dispute, you can do it. So what's the process? Let's say in an example, you've got a trademark, you see someone else's website is using your trademark in the URL, you're outraged, you called your lawyer, you said you're going to take all this legal action, you find out they're located overseas or someplace where it's very difficult to reach them. What are you going to do? Well, you can submit a UDRP complaint. Now, the UDRP is a policy, and it has a set of rules. And then there are certain providers which will administer these disputes, and they have their own supplemental rules. So usually somewhat helpful to get some guidance, some legal guidance to help you with this. But basically, you put together a complaint which has to follow these rules. And this is like a complaint in a lawsuit. Somebody's using my trademark in a domain name, and I want that domain name back. You file that complaint. Then the respondent, the person who owns the domain name, has 20 days to respond. Now, this is not like a court of law where you have to go in front of a judge and argue and interview witnesses and get depositions and all this craziness. What happens is you submit the complaint, they submit the response, an arbitrator is appointed, and they decide the case. That's it. There's not a lot of back and forth. So the entire process can be done in perhaps 60 to 90 days from filing the complaint to when you have a final decision. So I said that everything's based in trademark. So what are the grounds for filing a complaint? There has to be a couple of things to prove if you want to file a complaint. Number one, someone's domain name is identical or confusingly similar to your trademark or service mark. So your trademark doesn't have to appear in their domain name exactly, but it's got to be close. It can be identical, but if it's confusingly similar. So again, let's pick another example, Walmart. Instead if it said Walmart, change the T to a K. You could say that that's confusingly similar to using your trademark in the domain. So you've got to prove that first step. Number two, you got to prove the other party has no rights or legitimate interest in the domain. They're not a licensee of yours. They're not authorized through some manner to use this trademark. You don't have an agreement with them in the past that allows them to do this. And the third part, and this can be the most challenging part, is you have to say that their domain has been registered and is being used in bad faith. All right, to a layperson that might just say, all right, they're just doing something wrong. But I put it in red because bad faith is actually a specific thing which is laid out in the UDRP. So what is bad faith? There are 4 things that prove bad faith. Number 1, cyber squatting. That was my Walmart example. You know, you've just made a typo, one change, just to be a cyber squatter, and you put up a bunch of Google AdWords to make some revenue and make money off of those who are confused when they land on this domain. So cyber squatting is bad faith. Number 2, you're just trying to block the trademark owner from getting his domain. So you know someone who has a trademark, you get there first and get the domain name. That can be grounds for bad faith. However, they have to show that you've engaged in a pattern of this conduct. You do this all the time. You're always trying to block trademark owners. Number 3, you're trying to disrupt the business of a competitor. So you took your competitor's domain name because you guys are head-to-head competitors. You tried to get their trademarks so you can disrupt their business. And number 4, and this is the one that comes up most in the affiliate space, you're trying intentionally to attempt to attract users to your website for commercial gain by creating a likelihood of confusion. So that may be you're using someone's trademark, and all you want them to do is land on your page, see a couple of Google AdWords, make a couple of bucks, and then they'll move on. That's one of the most common grounds. Now, how do you fight back? Say you got one of these complaints and you're worried about losing your business. So how do you fight back and say, I've got an interest, I got a legitimate right to use this domain? Well, you can show that you were using this in connection with a bona fide offering of service or goods, the trademark, before the domain name dispute arose and before the trademark was registered. You can show that you've been commonly known by this domain, by this trademark in the industry. And I put up there as an example, Nissan.com. Go look at Nissan.com. And if you manage to be one of the few lucky people who got onto the Affiliate Summit Wi-Fi today, go take a look at Nissan.com right now. You're not going to see a car company. You're going to see a guy in, I believe he's in North Carolina or South Carolina, named Uzi Nissan. And he runs a repair company, computer repair company. And he's been using Nissan.com, and he's been fighting for a very, very, very long time with a Nissan Motor Company to keep that domain name. But that's his name, Nissan. And number 3, respondents make it a non-commercial or fair use without bad faith. And that's a very common thing. So if you register a website, we're in the Hilton Hotel, with all apologies to Hilton, you register a website that says thehiltonhotelsucks.com. That's a fair use. You have a criticism, and you just want to explain to people your criticism. And I don't think anyone's going to be confused about who's running that website. So what are your remedies? You filed this dispute, or someone's filed a dispute after you. You're worried your whole business is going to come down, crashing around you. You're going to be hauled off to jail because you've done something wrong. There's only 2 things that can happen in a dispute. Number 1, the domain name is transferred to the complainant, so they get your domain name. The registrar actually gets instructions to transfer it over after the dispute is over. Or number 2, less likely, you can just insist that the registration be canceled. But if you were on the complainant side, you wouldn't ask for cancellation of registration, because what's going to happen then? Somebody else is just going to get it. So you want the domain name to come over to you. You can't get money damages. You can't say, I want my domain name and I want $10,000 for all the grief they've caused me. If you want that, you got to go to court. All right, so I'm going to give you an example, 2 actual UDRP cases. There have been thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. The number keeps going up. This is a very, very active thing in the industry. So this one is Glenn Beck versus Isaac Island Hall. Glenn Beck, the new master of all media. What domain name do you think upset Glenn Beck? Was he going out to protect a domain name owned by Fox News? Was it something with one of his television or radio programs? What domain name really got under his skin? It was this one, www.glennbeck-raped-and-murdered-a-young-girl-in-1990.com. Somebody registered this domain name, and Glenn Beck was a little upset. So he did what most people do when they're upset. He called his lawyers and said, nobody can do this to me in America. So he brought a domain name dispute. In 2009, he brought it against the owner of this URL for trademark infringement. And again, as I said earlier, Everything is based on trademark. It's not based on the fact that you don't like this website, they're saying mean things about me, my feelings are getting hurt. It's about the trademark and nothing else. So what happened in the case? Well, the respondent did respond, and he said to explain that there's no trademark issue here, that even a moron in a hurry could not conclude that Glenn Beck sponsored, endorsed, or was affiliated with the website. The respondent said, look, I understand the way this works. It's all about trademark, and it's about confusion. Is anyone possibly confused that Glenn Beck registered this domain name and that he's running this website? And the decision is they agreed. This was a legitimate, non-commercial, fair use. So the domain name was not transferred. Again, it's all about trademarks. You can make a website. Again, I used the Hilton example. Let's say there's a politician you didn't like, or again a store that you had a beef with, and you can make a website. www. This is the name of the store. They really suck.com. There's no confusion. Nobody will think that the store is running that website. Now, let me give you one more example before I pass it on to Peter. This one was Diageo versus someone named John Zuccherini. And if you're familiar with the domain name industry, your head should be bobbing up and down when you see the name Zuccherini. This domain name was over, Diageo, as you know, runs many spirits and beers, and they own Guinness Beer. And so John registered a domain name, and the domain name he registered was www.guinnessreallyreallysucks.com. Now, I mentioned about John Zuccherini. In case you're familiar with him, he is a well-known cyber squatter who's been around for a very long time. So he didn't just register this one name, this one domain name. He wanted some others. He also registered GuinnessBeerReallyReallySucks.com, GuinnessBeerSucks.com, GuinnessSucks.com, GuinnessReallySucks.com. Basically, his thesis about Guinness beer is that it sucks. And he wanted the world to understand this. So he started registering many, many domain names. And of course, Diageo did not take kindly to this, and they brought a domain name dispute against him. Now, you heard what I was saying earlier about it's all about confusion. Does anyone think that Diageo registered GuinnessReallyReallySucks.com with or without hyphens? I don't think anyone really thinks that happens. So what did John have on his website? Well, he actually had a little content there. Didn't just have some Google AdWords, because if you're a cyber squatter, you put up Google AdWords, you're going to have trouble right away because it's a very bad inference. He had a little story on his website about a beef that he had with Guinness Beer, that he had written a letter to their lawyers and they wrote back to him. He was trying to justify why he made this website, because he had a real gripe. Now remember, I told you about the history of him. He was a well-known cyber squatter who had registered over 3,000 typo squatting, cyber squatting names. So he had a reputation. But he was trying to prove that this was a legitimate site. He does not like Guinness beer. So what did he put up there? He said, I was so upset when I got this stupid-ass letter from the goofball jack lawyers at Guinness beer. And of course, this is all made up, because there are no such thing as goofball jackass lawyers, as we all know. That I went to register the domain name GuinnessSucks.com, but guess what? That domain name is already owned by someone. Guess who? That's right. Guinness Beer owns it themselves. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks they suck. They think they suck themselves. So anyway, I did go and register a few names about Guinness Beer. So he was trying to show that he just had a gripe site, and this is what this was about. Well, what happened? The decision, the domain names were confusingly similar to Guinness's trademark, because it actually did contain the trademark in there, but it had sucks, really sucks, whatever. But they said the respondent lacked a legitimate interest, because he was a cyber squatter, and this is what he does. And that little excuse with that one paragraph that he really had a gripe with Guinness Beer was really phony. So that one, the domain name was transferred. It's one of the rare sucks cases, and that's actually a whole area of domain name law. It's one of the rare sucks cases in which the domain name actually was transferred. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter and bring up his presentation very quickly. And you can hold on to your questions or start texting them in, and we'll see if they magically appear.
I've been to the Guinness Beer really sucks. No, that's not true. Gary, thank you very much. You know, being in the dispute resolution business, it was a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much for that. Hey, well, thank you for all coming here this morning. We really appreciate it, for elbowing your way into this room. If you haven't been to a Knicks-Clippers game, it's kind of a little bit like this. I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle. Let me begin and introduce myself. My name is Peter Marinello, and I direct something called the Electronic Retailing Self-Regulation Program, which is part of the National Advertising Review Council. And since we're talking about domain names, let me see if I can get to ours. Yes, there it is. Now, the National Advertising Review Council has the unfortunate acronym of the NARC, or NARC, okay? So maybe you can appreciate the predicament I'm always in when I'm trying to encourage somebody to participate in this self-regulatory forum and explain to them that no, I am not part of any kind of drug enforcement sting. I just want to see what kind of evidence you have for your advertising claims. Now, don't laugh, because acronyms are very big in my world. But the two I want you to keep in mind are the two in the middle, the Council of Better Business Bureau, the BBB, and the ERA. Now, my program, which is known by another unfortunate acronym, ERSP, began in 2004. Was started by the ERA, who were very concerned about the proliferation of direct response claims, advertising claims that were being disseminated, really weight loss claims, kind of triggered off the whole thing. They wanted to keep the regulators off their back, so they started this self-regulatory mechanism. We do we have three major goals: essentially restoring consumer confidence in this industry, providing a nice, efficient mechanism of getting the real egregious guys off the air, and finally, again, really getting the guys who can't substantiate their claims, get them off the air, doing it quickly. Now, again, our purview is direct response advertising, which is essentially advertising in which consumers are asked to place an order or obtain additional information regarding a product or service through some means of electronic device directly with the advertiser. Now, our signature vehicle is the infomercial, actually, but you know, this advertising landscape has really evolved so much that now it encompasses online advertising and what goes on. You know, it's interesting, I began doing this back in 1992. It's amazing, I've been in this 20 years now. For you in the back, I don't look that old, by the way. In any event, okay, we get the first domain name registered in 1985. 1992, the year that I began practicing advertising review, we have fewer than 15,000 domain names. Here we are 18 years later, 192 million domain names. And that doesn't count the 385 million that have been deleted. Let's talk about .coms. 84 million .coms out there. Just about 12 million e-commerce .coms. Being a sports guy, we have just about 2 million sportsite .coms. Now, what's missing on this illustrious list of .coms? The pornography industry. Now, it's interesting, but you really can't talk about domain names without talking about the vice-like grip, the undeniable impact that this industry has had on domain names. Here's a list of the top 10 highest paid domain names ever. Look at two of the top three, sex.com, porn.com. Look how much money is being paid for these domain names. It's also interesting, this top 10 list, it's kind of a microcosm of our society. Money, sex, alcohol, kind of interesting. And also interesting with respect to the pornographic industry in this relationship. Two major things I think have happened recently. We've seen the recent sale of sex.com. I think it happened a couple of months ago. The original owners of the sex.com site went into foreclosure. They were forced to sell it. Cedo, who I believe is the largest online domain marketplace actually out there, ended up buying the sex.com URL, if you will. You know how much is being kicked around? $28 million for this, really unbelievable. And now to add one other piece to the whole XXX industry now, a couple of weeks ago, we have a XXX.com suffix now. So now what they're trying to do, I think, is kind of push all of the XXX guys now into one domain suffix. I mean, we can talk about the ramifications here probably all day, what this all means. Some say it's a symbolic gesture. I'm not quite sure, actually. And now adding to the consternation of domain name suffixes, we have another one, .co's now. So this pretty much now forces companies to perhaps strategize about dealing with .cos and what that all means. And it's interesting because I think Sara might get into this a little bit. With respect to these .cos, you know, it's funny, even in these recessionary-laden times, sales are going pretty briskly here. I think they're asking for $30 for a domain name now. And again, it's kind of forcing companies now trying to maintain their corporate profile in terms of getting all the domain names that they can that are relative to their company to go out and look into the .co suffixes as well. Okay. It's interesting because in what I do, the monitoring of the direct response landscape is pivotal in what I do. Maybe 40 to 50% of the cases that we do are monitoring cases, where we monitor the direct response landscape and try to figure out who's responsible for the advertising claims. And what we do is we conduct a who is search, generally, when we try to figure out who's kind of like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. And, you know, it should be pretty easy, because you would think that there should be all this pretty discernible contact information. ICANN, in fact, has these very specific requirements regarding what they ask for when you register a domain name. As you can see, providing free public access to the name of the registered domain name, its name servers, its registrar, the date the domain name was created, when the registration expires, contact information, administrative information, technical contact information. Now here's an example of a who is search that we did regarding a financial service company called the Bailout Group. Now I'm going to turn it to Phil Donahue for you older folks for a second. This is the information actually that they provided for contact information. Looks legitimate. We tried to call up, find out who was behind it all, and it ended up being this nice little old lady in Ventura, California, who had no affiliation whatsoever with the Bailout Group company. Oh, you done? Oh, thank you. You know, this would have been good. I could have ran around, but thank you very much for that. Because, you know, there are like private registration services like Dotster, for example, that, that offer for, of course, a small fee to be a proxy for website owners. So if I try to look up who's behind a certain website, there'll be this administrative proxy information where I can't find out exactly who is behind, who's behind the claims, who's responsible for the claims. You know, it's interesting. Before I kind of get into my little top 10 tips, I'm going to just get into one last thing, because, you know, working for the Council of Better Business Bureaus, they have a couple of strategies. You know, the Council of Better Business Bureaus has 126 different local and regional offices throughout the company. And in trying to kind of figure out ways to kind of keep up their profile and do things like that, they have a couple of different things. Of course, they want to try to purchase typos and misspellings of the name. And they also want to try to figure out what their customer base calls the company. Now, this is very important for a company universally known as the BBB. Now, I understand that they've actually purchased 300 different domain names. So in closing, I'm just going to hit on a couple of top 10s for you. As you guys can see, I love the top 10 list idea. Hey, you know what? The generic names, as Gary kind of mentioned, they're not protectable under trademark law. So you know what? Choose a good common generic name out there. I think Sara's going to hit on this a little bit. And of course, conduct a nice search with the United States Patent and Trademark Office as well. Intent to use trademark application, that's always a very helpful thing to do. It's kind of interesting because when you do file a trademark application, that means you haven't really registered your use in e-commerce yet. Again, the who is search, if you're trying to figure out when a domain name expires, a nice who is search is always helpful. Make sure you own your own domain name. Don't put it under the name of a web host or a registrar, for example, because you might be embroiled in some kind of controversy should you want to change the web host, should you want to change the register. Purchase spelling mistakes, we got into that a little bit before. A couple of things for the trademark owners. 6 and 8 are actually pertain to the trademark owners. Do you have a pretty strong case? You might want to do what Gary suggested and use the dispute resolution process. Gary, how much is it to file a UDRP case? Probably between $1,000 and $1,500 bucks. you may be able to get out of the whole thing with maybe $5,000 in legal fees. Not too bad. For those of you who've had the unfortunate experience of being in federal court, you know you have to dig deep for that. Number 7 is my get it right the first time thing, because I think in a dispute resolution case that you don't have an opportunity to supplement or amend the pleadings.
Not unless the panelist specifically asks you.
Yeah, so it's certainly something you have to keep in mind. If you don't have an airtight case, you might want to think about going to federal court instead. Number 9, Gary touched on this really neat piece of legislation, the Anti-Squatting Consumer Protection Act. Finally, if you find yourself embroiled in a controversy, it's a good idea to make sure you have a good IP attorney. I'm next to one of the best over here in the country. No, he didn't pay me to say that. However, again, I know I have him on my speed dial should I have some kind of cyber controversy. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Sara.
All right, let me get Sarah's presentation up. And Peter, sorry for running behind you while that was going on, talking to Sean, but we do have the magic code in case you want to send in questions. So when you text to 22333, you have to type in ASE10 4C. So you text to 22333, and you put in ASE10 4C, a space, and then your question, and again, it's going to magically appear. Okay, and with that, I will turn it over to Sara Freixa.
Good morning, thank you everyone. As Gary was saying at the very beginning, I work for Melbourne IT. Melbourne IT is one of the biggest companies in the world for domain registration, and my department in particular is about protecting brands online. Obviously, the main part of protecting your brand online is by registering your domain name, and I'm going to show you some of the other mechanisms to protect your brand online. So why using brand protection online services? There's 2 ways you can react against a brand infringement online. You can be proactive or you can be reactive. At the very beginning of the internet, companies were registering everything that was out there until they saw that they were registering thousands of domain names, but that didn't stop the third parties registering a new domain name that they didn't even think about it. So we are changing their approach, and we are telling them that while our main business could be the registration of domain names, that they should be taking another approach and be more proactive instead of reacting to third-party registration. So by being proactive, what do? We detect the impact that the registration of a domain name can be to a company. We stop scams. There's the brand doesn't suffer from their integrity, and we can do it by monitoring the content of the website. It can be a content in text, it can be a content in logo, or it can be the same domain name. Or, as we said before, they can keep on being reactive. They cannot have any tool to monitor the internet, and they just can't react. The problem with reacting to a problem is that normally they are being advised of that problem by a client, by an employee, and that's already too late. The damage is out there. The brand has been eroded, and they have started losing revenue. And obviously, if it's a big company, they suffer what we call the lost on client confidence. If you have received, and I'm pretty sure that everybody here has received before, one of these scam emails from one of their banks saying, hey, I know you're a client of mine, I'm Bank of America, and there was a problem with our software. We need you to log in again. Please enter your login and password, and just to confirm that you are still our client. 99.9% of the times, those emails are a scam, and what they want from you is to go to that website and you put your login and password, and they get this information. As I said before, the approach from the banks before was, well, what we do is when a client tells us that there's been a problem, we try to control the damage. Fortunately, right now, what they do is, as I said, being proactive, and they have monitoring in place, anti-phishing processes in place, so the second that it happens, they get advice and they can control the damage. I'm separating my presentation into things. I'm separating it in analysis, in the monitoring part of the protection, and the reaction, the enforcement of, okay, I was monitoring my brand and I discovered that I have an infringement. What do I do now? So let's start with the monitoring. There are two types of monitoring. You can either monitor your domain name or you can monitor the content of the internet. The main difference is that you can, there's some companies where the infringement is mainly being done at the domain name level. They find that there are third parties that are registering their domain names and they are registered domain names with their brand, but they really don't have much problem with the content of the websites. There are some other companies, and you can think companies like Twitter, that have many users that they wanna have a piece of Twitter. They wanna sell Twitter apps. They wanna be Twitter fans, and they not only register domain names that may contain their brand, but they also do the infringement in the content of the website. So it depends on your company policy. It depends on your business, but sometimes monitoring only the domain name is not enough, and you have to go for a bigger approach, and you have to monitor the whole content of the internet. What you do with that is that you protect your brand 360. So I'm going to tell you about the sources that are used for the monitoring of the content. We obviously use the web crawling, and what you do when you do the web crawling is that you go inside the content of the websites to see what's going on there. Obviously, the domain name monitoring is part of the content of the monitoring of the content. You not only go inside the website, but you also take a look at the domain. And there's the image recognition and the analysis. I'm going to go a little bit farther in the next slide about the image recognition. And sorry about that, the email spam that, as I said, it was mainly these days for banks. But there's a new scam going on where you receive an email that it says that certain company is offering you a job, and that the only thing that they need from you is that you send your social security number and your personal information so they can start sending you the money as soon as you start working with them. So it's not longer, the phishing attacks are no longer affecting only to banks, but also to companies. The image recognition software, the way it works is that some companies, the logo is the most important part of the companies. They might not even have, the logo might not even have a letter. So it's not enough by monitoring in the domain name, as I said before. You need to monitor the logo. And what we do is that we take the image, we divide it by sections, and what we do is the analysis of the pixels of that image, so that you don't get false positives, you don't get a similar logo. I mean, it's going to be a similar, but it's going to be confusing similar logo to yours. So the results that you receive are really, really interesting for you. The technology is the latest technology that you can be used for logo, and it's going to help you to find those websites that don't mention your brand in the domain name, don't mention your brand in the content, but they are using your logo. Think about a company like VeriSign. Everybody here recognizes VeriSign by the lock in the website that says, no worries, you can pay in this website. It's going to be very safe because we are using VeriSign technology. Many websites that you see that they are using the VeriSign lock are really not VeriSign users, but they want to sometimes with bad faith, sometimes with good faith, they just want you to trust that site, and nothing is going to happen to your credit card information. You can use us. A company like VeriSign is one of the main users of this technology because they want to make sure that if someone out there is using the lock, at least they are a VeriSign user and your information is protected. Because if something happened to you when using one of these websites, the first thing that you're going to do is like, whoa, I was using VeriSign, and a website that was saying that was using VeriSign and my information was stolen. How did that happen? It might not be VeriSign's fault, but it definitely, as you can understand, damages their brand and damages the image that you have from them. This is the second part. It's like, okay, you were monitoring your brand, you were monitoring your logo, you were doing what you were supposed to do, and you discovered that someone out there is infringing your trademark. So what do? You go to Gary, and what is Gary gonna do? Is going to protect your brand. I mean, it's going to take care of the cases that we discovered for you. There's different ways of doing it. You can use a cease and desist letter, and I don't know if anyone here has experience with that, but the cease and desist letter is the best way to approach one of these infringements. You are trying in an amicable way to resolve a situation when you don't know if that party is using your trademark with good faith or with bad faith. Sometimes people use the domain name or uses the logo because they didn't know better, because they thought that the domain name was free and they could register, so they went ahead and used it because the product or the service, or they are just fans of your website. They thought it's okay if I go ahead and register this domain name, or it's okay if I use the VeriSign log because I know for sure that my website is safe. So you send one of the cease, or the lawyer sends one of the cease and desist letters, and you try, as I said, to arrange the problem in an amicable way. The key components of the cease and desist letter, as we were saying, is the identification of the third party. There's a work behind the sending the cease and desist letter. We have to identify who's that party. We have to recognize if there's a trademark infringement in the website that you want to approach. And as I said, is a way of recovering your IP rights. Another approach is the website shutdown. When the infringement is being done in the content of the website, and it's a clear trademark infringement, one thing that you could do is the website shutdown. If you try by yourself, most probably you're going to be pretty unsuccessful, because when a situation is like this, the owner of the domain and the owner of the website knows perfectly well what he is doing. And they know perfectly well that they are infringing your trademark. In this case, the results or the percentage that you're seeing in the screens are related to websites that have counterfeit goods. And using our technology, 92% of the cases where a website is selling counterfeit goods gets shut down in 96% of the time in less than 4 hours. But as I said before, this has to be a clear-cut case of trademark infringement before we can do that. The way we do that is we approach the ISPs, we approach the the website owner, we approach the register of the domain name, and we do whatever it's possible and it's in our hands to get this website shut down. Something that both Gary and Peter have mentioned before is the UDRP or the URP. The UDRP or the URP is specifically when the infringement is being done in the domain name. So it's not valid if the domain name is ilovebags.com and there is infringement of Chanel bags in the website, because that URL, that www.ilovebags.com, there's no trademark infringement at a domain name level. It's at the content level. For that case in particular, as we said before, would be the website shutdown solution. Gary went into detail for the UDRP and the URP, so I'm not going to stop much there. I'm going to let everyone here, if you have any questions that you want to talk about. You're going to take that? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. Now, again, we have our special master, way to text, but, we might as well go old-fashioned, which always works very well. So, are these mics on as well? I'd say if anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand, and we'll just address the questions up here if you don't want to bother texting in. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Have you ever seen an instance where somebody has registered a domain name, say 8 or 10 years ago, and then a company sprouts up and happens to use that domain or that name, even if it's somewhat generic, say bluefish.com or greendart.com or something like that, something that's relatively generic, and then someone sprouts up and they do have that company name. What is the original owner of that domain name's situation at that point, or options?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question since we're being recorded. The question was, what do you do when someone has registered a domain name a very long time ago and suddenly you come along with a company that has the same name and want to start using it? Whenever I work with startup companies and they want to get into business, one of the very first things we say is secure the URLs. And if the URLs are not available, we should start to dig in and find out what's the reason. If you've built everything around, blue crazy starfish logos and whatnot, and you go to register the URL and it's not available, you might want to rethink your strategy. Because again, as we spoke about earlier, you could try to bring a domain name dispute, but they've had the domain name for a long time. Now, that's not to say you're totally closed off. There are cases where an after-acquired trademark can go after a URL that was registered previously, but that's a lot harder. So usually it's just advice when you get started in a business to look at the URLs right away and to register everything you're thinking about, and then figure out your business later.
I was thinking about the competition piece of it. Now, do you think it would matter if that other company wasn't in direct competition with the original Bluefish guy? Does that play into it as well, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a case where there's no problem initially, and you can't get that domain name from the registrant, but later on, after time, maybe they could change the way they're using the website. They might start learning about your company and realize, wow, I have the key domain name for their business. Well, I'm going to stick up some Google ads. Maybe I'll even put up ads in their line of business to try and confuse people and make some money, which I've seen that happen quite often. Again, not that I want to give advice to cyber squatters, but if you're going to squat on a domain name, do not have Google ads in the same category as the one you're squatting on, because that's a just giveaway that you're going to lose any dispute.
And if you are the owner, if you are the owner of one of these domain names that were generic at the very beginning, and then let's say Bluefish, and tomorrow there's a new Facebook tool that is called Bluefish, and they want the bluefish.com, one of the things that you have to bear in mind is that the trademark has to be registered before the domain name was registered. If the trademark was registered after the domain name was registered, you are safe, unless, as we were saying before, you change the content of that website and now it's infringing on the trademark rights.
Other questions from the audience? Yes. Yep, right up front.
Several, actually.
Peter.
Sorry, I took them off and then I couldn't.
No, that's
see.
okay.
You showed a hidden proxy domain name
Right.
and then said that it was registered over here to this person.
Right.
How'd you find that out?
Well, we pride ourselves on our savvy investigative work. A lot of times what we do is we exhaust, all avenues, whether it's calling people up or, doing the who is search. And I'll tell you what, in the direct response world, because we gravitate toward this 800 number thing, here's what we did. We called up the 800 number that was on the website. It went to a company that was somewhat affiliated to what I'll call the ground zero domain owner, okay? And we basically held their feet to the fire. We said, listen, if you don't really provide us with some information about who owns that domain, then your name is going to be the one that we put on our case report. I'll tell you what, transparency and accountability are two words that are very big in what we do. I think with all, listen, no one's a bigger proponent of privacy in this hot potato debate that's going on than I am. With respect to individual, privacy, I think once you throw your hat in the e-commerce ring, there is a degree of accountability and transparency that should come with it.
Yeah, and I think that the private registration area is very frustrating because, you take a look, you see who it is, you can proceed and analyze your case and your situation. Maybe you want to make a legitimate offer to buy or whatnot. You want to know who you're dealing with. The private registration is very painful. And, to Peter's point, when we have clients that deal with that situation, we start doing some investigative work. First thing I'm going to do is, do a smart who is and see where this domain is being hosted. Trace that IP address, maybe get in touch with the hosting company if something very bad is going on. And then again, look at the content on the website. Maybe try to, interact with the person. I've had clients hire investigators to interact with the website, see if they can pull information out of them. So there are ways you can find it, but it can be frustrating.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one quick piece to that too. Is when we do conduct this who is search and we do see that, okay, there is the disclosed information of who the administrative contact is, what the telephone number is, there certainly is a presumption there, okay, that we're dealing with a good corporate citizen here. However, alternatively, if it's all proxy information, if you get that bogus direct phone number, hey, listen, red flag goes up, but we may be dealing with an uncooperative marketer, for sure.
And actually, I want to turn to Sara on that question. Do people ever contact you when there's private registration, with, say, you got to tell me who this is?
Absolutely. I mean, there's not something that I can do, but we have a legal compliancy person based in Australia, and the complaints that we receive out of the domain name that is behind a private who is, are redirected to them, and if they find that is a trademark infringement, then they might be able to do something. One thing that I've used before, and it's very useful, is running a who was. If the domain name has been registered from the very beginning under a domain by proxy, then forget it. You're not going to get any information from there. But sometimes the domain name has been registered for 10 years, and the first 5 years, it had some information, and then they hide it. Try to contact the information for the first 5 years, because 90% of the times, the information is still up.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Very good tip. Other questions? Let's take one over here so we can mix up.
If you've registered a .com and have been doing doing business for a significant period of time, what sort of legal rights do you have to the other TLDs, like .net, .org, and the country TLDs? Do you need to go out and try and register as many of those top-level domains as possible, or legally are you obligated? Legally, do you have a right to those?
Right. The question was, if you've been using a .com for a long period of time, what legal right do you have to other GTLDs or even a CCTLD? When you start using that domain name, if that domain name contains a trademark, then you are using the trademark in commerce. And whether or not you've registered that trademark with the Patent and Trademark Office or not, you are acquiring some rights. So just by using that URL, the trademark in the .com, you're acquiring rights. So if some cyber squatter came around and tried to register the .net, you would have very good rights, because in your complaint you would say, we've been using the .com for 10 years and our company has been known by this trademark and we've established some goodwill and consumers recognize us here. So you do attach some rights. Now, from a practical matter, if you can go to a registrar and register domain names for a very low price, it often makes sense. I mean, most clients, when they say, can you register this .com for me, or they're going to go do it, I say, grab the .net, grab the .org, grab the typical typo squatting mistakes, or intentional or not intentional, that people might register. And then the other challenge is, and this is all about defending yourself, because you don't want to sit back and wait for the dispute and then have to pay $1,500 filing fee for a dispute, hire legal counsel. Sorry, I'm putting down my industry. But you want to save your money, and the cost of domain names are so cheap. So a lot of questions I get these days are when Columbia opens up their domain names so you can get a .co, so you can get typo squatters in case someone accidentally types .co instead of .com. And clients say, should I register this? And we talk about the cost and what's involved and what it would cost to get that domain name back if somebody else took it. And quite often, the outcome is it makes sense to register a whole bunch of domains and just hold on to them as a defensive measure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it always going to be according to your company policy. There are companies that say register everything that is out there, and there are companies that, as Gary was saying, well, does it make sense? How much is going to take? How much is going to cost me to recover this domain name if something happens? And in these cases where the company policy is, we will only do something if something happens to the domain name, is when I recommend what we were saying before, the monitoring, because at least you will know right away when someone has registered a domain name that contains your brand. Considering the cost for monitoring, you are saving, first of all, a lot of headaches and a lot of time, because the moment you register a domain name, in less than 24 hours, someone can put a content in that website that damages your brand. So you want to know right away, and not by a third party telling you, wait, have you seen what's happening at the NewYorkTimes.co?
Yep. Other questions? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off before. Just go ahead.
One of the things in picking a name and so forth, I'm relatively new in this game plan. My attorney was saying I had picked a name and I loved it, and da da da. My attorney said, yeah, it's probably not trademarkable because it's not unique enough. And he said, make up a name. What's your advice on that?
So the question was, if you try to register a domain name that's somewhat generic and you can't get a trademark over it, and that that can be an issue. There's pluses and minuses. If it's not a trademark, then you're not going to have anyone infringing on it, but then it's hard to protect things. And there are lots of public cases, and I'll refer to one that some of my colleagues worked on, but it's completely public. They were representing giftcertificates.com. And it was very hard to prove that there was a trademark, because you can't get trademark rights in something that's generic. If I open a deli downstairs and I call it let's use that Bluefish example, the Bluefish Awesome Fantastic Deli, I could possibly get a trademark registration on that. If I called it Gary's Deli, that's generic, and you can't get registration over a generic trademark. So to your attorney's advice, they might be saying, yeah, you want something that you can defend, that you can go out and stop other people. So you register the .com, someone else registers the .net. If you have trademark rights in it, you can stop the person registering that .net or get it back. If it's generic, then you're not going to be able to fight back against that .net and get it in any way if it's generic.
You know, I'm just going to add one thing, too, with respect to that. It's interesting because, you know, part of what I do, again, is looking at the claim, seeing what messages are being communicated to consumers with the claim. And the URL, the domain name, that is part of the claim. You know, Gary brought up an example earlier. I think it was bestaffiliates.com or something like that. And that's, you know, if you have a claim where, you know, it's a superiority claim, even like, hey, #1dietproduct.com. Hey, folks, that's a claim, and we're gonna look for evidence to support that claim. And you know what? The Federal Trade Commission is gonna sniff around as well, I bet.
Yep.
And if you want to go for a generic, you have to have a lot of money. If not, look at Microsoft and Windows, Office, Vista, and that they might be a trademark, but it will be very difficult for them to fight if someone registers Office in a CCTLD that is referring to their trademark if the content is not referring to them.
Yep. All right, with that, we're at the end of our session, but you can certainly feel free to come up and ask any of the panelists questions. I want to thank Peter and Sara very much, and thank all of you for attending today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.